Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook, the last, check that, the 1st of August and the last before our primary election on Tuesday. So lots to talk about with this esteemed panel, starting with Joe Holleman from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, who is sitting in for Wendy Weiss, who's taking the night off. Bill McClellan from STLtoday.com and a Donnybrook founder. She's the executive editor of STL Mag and St. Louis Magazine, Sarah Fenske. And columnist and editor from the St. Louis American, we welcome Alvin Reid. Well, your old haunting ground, Sarah, the Riverfront Times is in the news, kind of. We kind of have an idea of who's running it now, or do we?
I think we do. The editor has revealed himself. He has my old job, and he shared this long tweet thread today that had a lot of people in St. Louis Twitter going, what is this guy up to? It sounded like a lot of it had been written by AI. It was, you know, at one point he said, oh yeah, and we take an open stance on legal cannabis. It's like, marijuana's been legal in Missouri for a while. This is not edgy. It basically sounds like he wants to turn the RFT into something that does a lot of content about the online porn site OnlyFans. So I don't want to say I told you so, but I kind of feel like I told you so. There are these zombie newspaper sites that no longer have reporters on the ground doing local journalism. And what they're doing is they're just filled with all this sponsored content, and they're using the paper's good Google ranking to try to help these porn purveyors rank higher. And that, I think we all know now, is the future of the Riverfront Times.
Oh, that's pretty sad.
That is pretty sad.
I had no idea that porn sites needed help.
From newspapers.
From newspapers of all things. They're not getting enough clicks.
Yeah. Well, that's because you are a hack. Or so said Wesley Bell, who's running for Congress against Cori Bush, in a recording that was released this past week. Mark Maxwell of Channel 5, I think, was the first in this area to put it out there. But it was a conversation that the two had last year when he was running for U.S. Senate, and you wrote a story quoting Ed Rohde, the political operative, who said he thought that Wesley Bell was running for U.S. Senate to increase his name recognition so that he could challenge Cori Bush for her seat in Congress, which turned out to be true. Well, apparently Cori Bush called Wesley Bell about that. They had a long conversation. Your name came up a couple of times. You were called raggedy by one, hack by the other, but
yes.
How do you plead?
First, I have been called worse by people who love me. So
okay,
how this all started, actually, there's sort of a genesis to it here on Donnybrook. If you remember back last year in the spring, Wesley Bell had been sort of trying to take over or help out Kim Gardner, and there was this talk that he was going to get promoted to be sort of a dual prosecutor. And so that sort of ambition of his was in play, and I believe it was you and Wendy who interviewed him on the Next Up show that had been on, and Wendy asked him, are you going to run for another office? You have a bright future? And he said, oh, no, I'm going to stay in my lane.
I'm the one who asked him.
Were you the one that asked it?
And he said, oh, Mr. McClellan, I'm staying in my own lane.
And then like a week later, he switched lanes. So I wrote a story that basically pointed out less than however many days since he had said, no way am I running for another office, Wesley Bell is running for another office. So I also had written some other stories before that he had been displeased with on spending practices. So I did then a follow-up story where I called some political experts about the Senate race that he entered, saying, what do you think his chances are against Lucas Kunce? And quoted about 5, 6 local political operatives. What do you think his chances are, da-da-da. And Rohde said about the Cori Bush thing. So it wasn't me writing my opinion. And apparently Wesley Bell was calling Cori Bush to smooth that over.
Okay.
I have no intention of running against.
She or someone in her camp released the tape. What What do we think? Is that appropriate, Sarah Fenske, to release the tape of a private conversation? I wouldn't think so.
I mean, to me, I think this is kind of a generational thing. I think Cori's about my age, and a lot of people my age just tape everything as a matter of course. That's just how they kind of keep track of what's going on. Is they're just taping these phone conversations. They have the record when they need it later. And I'm sure that she's grown progressively angrier as this race has gone on. There's a lot of polls that are showing that she's down, and she's thinking, this guy said he wasn't even going to run against me. After all the shots that have been taken in this race, I don't think releasing this audio is the biggest deal or the worst faux pas whatsoever.
Well, it might be generational, Sarah, but I would hate to have private calls that conversations I had more than a year ago suddenly pop up in the news. I mean, there's not much you can say except that's not who I am.
Right. I mean, I get why Wesley doesn't like it. I'm sure he feels a little awkward around Joe right now, but I kind of assume at this point that anything I say on the phone, the other person might be taping it.
I do too, but at the same time, I just think that I think it is wrong to do that. Now, maybe I'm just a little old school, and I do miss my, crank phone with the extension cord that went all the way through the house, but I just think that should not be done. And that was my first reaction, when I was listening to it. I said, first of all, I know you're in a political race, but this is just, I just looked down upon that. But one thing I did think, and this was kind of maybe political, kind of in the weeds, was that Ed Rohde really looked like a genius, but I do think that Ed Rohde was talking about 2026 and not 24, but it really fell into his hands, so maybe he should run for office.
Well, as far as the story goes, I'll settle for just being right, that my story was correct. And I do think in context, we have to understand that when that phone call took place, this was before the Hamas attack in October. So what was said very well may have been truthful at that time. But I always tell people when they'll say about politics, and the old saying of tomorrow is a long time in politics. So saying in June, who foresaw October 7th? And those changed things. But
well, he did say, you have my word that I am not running against you. And then 4 months later, he did.
I think the thing that it did was I think that overall, it gave us all a wonderful look at the nature of politics.
Well, yeah.
And how that gets conducted.
But let's not forget, this phone call was transcribed halfway through. We don't know what was said in the first half of the phone call. So we only got the second half, according to KSDK, which I thought, if you're going to give the phone call, if you're going to present the phone call, present the whole phone call. Bill, after last week's program, a lot has happened with the St. Louis Public Schools. First of all, Keisha Scarlett, the superintendent, has been put on a temporary leave of absence. And apparently, according to some sources today, the new communications director, whose name is Phoenix Jackson, has decided to resign. You recall we discussed last week that the superintendent, under her first year, the budget has gone from a $17 million surplus to a $35 million deficit. She brought in at least a dozen or so employees and some spouses at 6 figures from Seattle to work here. And they don't really have a transportation plan for schools, for the start of school, which starts August the 19th. But overall, it looks as though the school board is being held blameless so far. Nobody's asking for any resignations there, should they?
Well, I think it goes deeper than just this, to the St. Louis idea that you need somebody from out of town to run things. And, I'm sure there was somebody inside the school district who would have been a fine superintendent, but we had to have a national search and come up with Miss Scarlett. And it turned out to be a disaster. We have these all the time. We've had them on the newspaper, where you want to fall in love with a candidate, and they have a national search, and it just doesn't work. And I feel a little bit that way about Chief Tracy. When we now find out that, well, his PR guy is in Wilmington and the new web thing is from Philadelphia, web design is from Philadelphia, people here can get the job done if we would give them the opportunity.
Well, far be it from me to defend the transplants and out-of-towners here, but I think there is something good about bringing in some fresh blood, especially for struggling institutions. And I think the St. Louis Public School District, they have had some trouble. I think the last superintendent, Calvin Adams, was great, but there were so many challenges ahead of them. And Keisha Scarlett, frankly, looked great, sounded great, seemed like a terrific hire. I mean, our reporter at the RFT interviewed her, came away just totally charmed. She had a great resume, had what looked like a good track record. I really don't blame the board for this.
Well, you know, people interview well, but you can't manage it. You know, Elliot Davis, who's just retiring after all these, remember that the great stuff he did on that Larry Salsi, who was the bi-state chief, who'd been, you know, brought in out of, I think, Colorado, and came in, and he was another one of those guys who interviews well but doesn't manage well. And as he was on his way out, Elliot Davis asked him some question in a Larry Davis fashion. And Salsi said, "You're a clown. You fit in with the whole place. You're all a bunch of clowns." And it's like, there's an outsider being frank, talking to us.
Well, there are a lot of clowns here. I mean, we know that.
Clowns and hats.
And you have to take the chance on the person who just crushes the interview. I give the Board of Education credit that they then moved very swiftly.
Exactly.
When these problems came up, they did not sit around and try to defend this hire.
Right, and now, first, I'm glad the people in Lansing, Michigan at the paper there, and the people down in Little Rock, you know, Arkansas, that, you know, they need editor. I'm glad they didn't think that everybody needs to come from
hire people,
there.
but not at the very top. I was.
What? So I couldn't have been the editor of the paper because I was the overall editor?
I think it helps to have an editor who knows the town. I think it helps.
It does help.
I mean, well, okay, all right.
But are you going to get the very best candidate if you're stuck with the interim candidate?
I feel Phoenix Jackson got a raw deal. You know, Panera is headquartered in Sunset Hills, and the CEO has never lived here. He's always been in Massachusetts. Have you not heard of digital nomads? The whole country is working. You know, my neighbor just moved to Portugal, and she and her husband are working in St. Louis from Portugal. What's a school district?
We're going to bring this up because, first of all, this is my chance, this is my chance to say I told you so. Because you guys beat me up several weeks ago saying I was trying to starve the school district by criticizing
on a different topic. On a daycare stuff.
Yeah.
On giving them money. And my point was, they can't handle the money they have now. And I think this is exactly what that shows. And the idea that comparing a private corporation to a tax-supported school district, I don't even see the comparison, Charlie.
I don't see why the rules would be different.
I don't either.
Basically speaking.
Look, she was hired to do a job, which, you know, looked like she was doing at least a decent,
Everyone thought so till 10 days ago.
Now, I will say this, that do they bear some responsibility?
The board?
Yes, yes. But the thing is that this whole debacle, I'm not putting on them, I'm putting that on her. And if Phoenix just had not sounded the way she did, maybe I could get with her doing her job from Houston. It's not where she lives, it's what she said.
We love how these things sound in all the window dressing and people talking, well, you get these people, that people. This is nothing but old school favoritism and cronyism.
I agree.
You hired people from an old job.
Oh, no, it's worse than that.
If this would have been some old cigar chomping guy, we'd say, clean them out, get rid of them all. And the school board finally is taking the responsibility that they should always have to watch out over our
That's the whole thing. I don't think that the school board should be lauded for acting promptly. These issues didn't happen overnight. The 20 or so people from Seattle weren't hired last week. You don't go from a $17 million budget surplus to a $35 million deficit overnight.
That's the part that shouldn't have just slipped by. There was too much money being spent without any money coming in. I get that part, okay? As far as the people that were hired, okay, Seattle could have come up one too many times. I agree with that. But I'm just saying that, first of all, this is beyond cronyism. This is grifting, okay? That's, something was going on you know, that...
I think the words are synonymous. Drifting.
But the board didn't explain why she was let go.
Oh, I know why she was let go.
But she didn't even let go. Why is she on temporary leave?
Because you can't just out and out fire her.
Why
because
not?
the fool around
Have you not
sued.
met George Steinbrenner?
No, I'm just saying that.
Again, with the private companies and public institutions, do you get the difference?
People in public office are jettisoned, as you scribe like to describe.
Did a heck of a job on these stories.
Well, let's move on, only because of time. Alvin, Reid, I want to ask you about a commercial that's running by Will Scharf, Clayton attorney who represented Donald Trump, who's running for Attorney General against Andrew Bailey, the current Attorney General, right? And in this ad, he says that Bailey, when he was working as assistant prosecutor in Warren County, was light on one Ken Simpson, who later became a cop killer. Some people are saying, you know, you can't put that on Andrew Bailey. What do you think? Is that a fair commercial?
I think it's a very fair commercial. I also think it would even been worse if, let's say, a Kip Gardner was in Andrew Bailey's situation. Oh, she'd be just torched over that, even if she had been a good prosecutor. I think that in politics, to this day, there is worse than that. And quite frankly, I think it follows a truthfulness that, oh yeah, this guy was out on the street because you allowed him to be out on the street, Andrew Bailey, and it led up to this. Are you personally responsible? Maybe not. Are you responsible in the eyes of the voters, or I want to make you look like that? Yes. Oh, and by the way, Andrew Bailey, you reap what you sow, man. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, I never thought I'd be defending Andrew Bailey, but, you know, when Andrew Bailey was an assistant prosecutor outstate, and this guy, there were a couple misdemeanor charges against him, and Bailey didn't get him sent to prison, and so several years later, the man kills a police officer. To blame Bailey for it and to say that, as Will Scharf did, that he betrayed the blue. I just think that's, and the family, the officer's family, thinks that the commercial is outrageous. Well, so I'm going to agree with the family.
And I said, like, I am with, listen, the family, yes, I get it, and I'm not trying to be cruel to the family. But I am saying that if I said, like, you know, I think we should have, I think we should have a citizen review board of the police, the first thing I'm reading is that I hate the cops. He hates the blue. Yeah, no, he's not a law and order guy. Like, no, I just said they might need a civilian review board, okay? So all this hyperbole when it comes about the police, hey, man, it works both ways. So,
I shudder to think that people are basing their votes solely on political ads, and I've been afraid of that for decades now, is that nobody's, like, reading newspapers or watching television news programs, and they just watch ads and go, well, that guy's terrible. I mean, you know, it's like, okay. I mean, you know, the ads are made to do one of two things. I'm great. My opponent is not.
That's
evil. It.
Right,
That's
I get it.
Right.
And also,
I'm good, he's evil.
I had no idea that this had all happened.
Hey,
so I did learn it from that commercial.
I will say, if I'm the family, I completely understand.
I understand. My reaction would be the same.
To see your loved one being used for political campaign fodder. Right. I don't care who does it. I would have a problem.
And I will just say, as all of our viewers know, if you want to avoid the campaign ads, just keep it on 9 PBS, where we don't have any commercials whatsoever. Bill, I want to ask you about St. Louis County. Front page above the fold today in your newspaper, that the county has overpaid 61 people over 8 years for a total of $195,000. Some people think, oh, that's awful, mismanagement. And yet it's a $1 billion annual budget, so we're talking less than $30,000 a year. These things happen, don't they?
Well, apparently in the county they do, but much more than I thought. I thought the county was a little bit together, and the argument that, well, we didn't know, this left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. I'm surprised that it was so schlocky. Now, most of the problems were very minor, you know, 6 people over a number of years, $14,000 sort of thing. But like municipal court, one person got like over $30,000 that he or she wasn't entitled to, and I wonder about that. But I was surprised how misrun the county is.
I think the thing that surprised me the most was that the county doesn't have one payroll system.
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, and it goes back to the thing that I had mentioned before about stewardship. I don't, you know, if an employee was getting $100 extra a week for 52 weeks, are they going to go, you know, boss, I got too much money on my paycheck. Okay, you can't expect that to happen. But how is it that it got through? To me, it's not who got what, but it's why did anybody get anything over what they were supposed to? What sort of system do you have that doesn't track that? And then you find out, well, the county doesn't use one payroll system.
Yeah,
that
it seems like
defies logic.
It seems like they've got some bad processes here.
Yeah.
It frankly feels a little raggedy. And I'm just saying. But you know, this all came to light because apparently the county auditor was able to get herself some raises by going directly to council members. And it sounds like council members kind of figured out how to give raises to staff. And you can't have that. You have to have these checks. I think this is exactly the problem we're seeing with the St. Louis schools. That, you know, people are just going on hiring sprees, and it's like people just need to be paying a little more attention to these things. So I agree with you. I think this is it's strange and troubling.
Over 8 years, $195,000.
Not a lot of money. Yeah.
Joe reported that the county prosecutor bought 2 automobiles for what? $140,000?
35.
Yeah. I mean, it's so small. It would pay maybe the salary of one baseball player for one inning.
I honestly don't think this overpayment story would be that large unless it involved Shalonda Webb and Ritter Days and these folks, and it's that season, you know.
But the point is,
but yes, the 2 payroll systems.
But when you do this, you have different payroll systems, and let's not forget that when I was writing the story about Wesley Bell's vehicles, the county had just come out and said they had a $31 or $41 million revenue shortfall. Well, it reminds me of the old Everett Dirksen, for us old enough to remember. Yeah. We said $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and pretty soon you're talking real money.
Okay, speaking of money, Alvin Reid, I want to ask you about CarSheild, St. Peter's-based company, which has just agreed to pay $10 million in a settlement with the Federal Trade Commission, which accused the firm of having these commercials on television, which 9 PBS viewers didn't see, but which basically had Ice-T and Chris Berman and others saying, hey, you buy this warranty, you won't pay for repairs, every service station will accept it, and you'll be happy. Well, it turns out service stations didn't accept it and didn't cover much of anything, and even the endorsers didn't use the product, which is an FTC violation. So, should they be dropped from advertising by local television stations?
I think so, and I think our franchises that use them as the advertisers or their sponsors, once, I guess, if you're contractually obligated to it, but once it expires, I think you move on from that. Because as I mentioned, boy, these grifters, these piranhas, I mean, these home protection and car protection things are just awful, and they prey on people who can't afford it and seniors, and it's terrible. And I mean, I'm sorry that people fall for it, but they do, and I think the right thing to do by our franchises would be to say, like, okay, that's advertising we don't need.
Well, how about the athletes who are there? I use this. And you go, I don't think you do. I don't think you're really worried about a $600 repair.
Right. Maybe the guy who takes care of my car uses CarSheild, you know, but I think it's the FTC's job to investigate this kind of stuff. I don't think it's the player's job to do their sort of due diligence before they sign on to endorse it. Now, obviously, that the FTC has come out with all this information, sure, they should not re-up as spokespeople, but you can't go around and, you know, TV stations can't go investigate every ad. Is this a good product? Is that a good product? Can we put our seal of approval behind it? That's the difference between advertising and journalism. The advertisers are paying to be there. You haven't
But you know what? The players' attorneys and others should tell them, if you don't use the product, you can't endorse it. Our union, the Screen Actors Guild, used to tell us, hey, if you don't use a product, you better not endorse it on the radio, even though the FTC, as far as I know, only cracked down once. It was a product called Body Solutions. Where,
oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, right. That was pretty famous.
Right.
Sarah, I want to ask you to say a few words about former, one time anyway, Donnybrook panelist Elliot Davis, best known for his intrepid reporting on Fox 2, much to the dismay of many local public servants. He would follow them with a microphone and ask them to be accountable for their graft and corruption. He's decided to retire. And you talked to him for a St. Louis Magazine piece.
Yeah, I asked him to give me sort of an exit interview, and he very graciously sat down with me for almost an hour. It was so great to hear his war stories. I mean, this man has been through it. People grabbing his microphone. People arrested him at one point because they didn't like the questions he was asking. They actually shot his cameraman when he was doing the story about a corrupt towing company. Yep. I mean, he was there in the trenches, and he tells these stories so well. What I love about him is he was doing this accountability journalism where he's asking, you know, what happened to this money? Joe, what did you do? And he managed to make it so compelling that he made viewers care about these stories about money and municipal spending. As a journalist, that is so hard to do. He did it in a way that you couldn't look away. I got to give him credit for that.
I think it's the base of journalism. If the one thing we're supposed to be doing is hold elected officials accountable. I mean, I can't think of anything else that we do that's more important. And Elliot showed up and did it. Sometimes it seemed like small amounts of money. You'd get that, go, that wasn't very much, I think. But it all adds up, and it also speaks to the trust or lack thereof that we have in so many of our elected officials. And I love the fact that Elliot was out there knocking on their doors, standing there with the microphone with his cameraman, and they'd just say, why did you do this? Why did you do this? That's exactly what journalism is supposed to do.
It was always amazing that they would talk to Elliot, instead of just saying, well, I'm going to look into that. Thank you for, they'd try to justify what they were doing.
Or either try to, maybe not explain it away, but the ones that were hostile, then it was just like they are corrupt. They're grabbing the microphone and having him arrested because he was at the city council meeting. I forgot what municipality that was. It was North County, wasn't it? But I mean, I liked it because it was old school journalism, and he was the last of it.
Well, Elliot, enjoy your retirement. After all, you earned it. Okay, let's go to the old mailbag and see what folks had to say. Charlie, if you're going to talk about Vice President Kamala Harris, please pronounce her name correctly. And also note that she should be referred to as Vice President Harris, not Ms. Harris. Thank you, Jane Orling from St. Louis, Missouri. We heard from Melly Euler of St. Louis, who wrote, Bill McClellan should think about apologizing to J.B. Pritzker for personally attacking his appearance. It is his record that counts. Thank you, Melly. And Frank Medica of Maryville wrote, maybe the Donnybrookers can explain how the campaign commercials showing candidates firing assault weapons, grenade launchers, and flamethrowers have anything to do with good governance. You can write us care of 9PBS. Use that zip code 63108. Don't forget emails, donnybrook@9pbs.org. On social media, use hashtag DonnybrookSTL. Call the 9 line, won't you? 314-512-9094. And listen to us on your favorite podcast source. Thanks to Joe Holleman for sitting in for Wendy Weiss. She'll be back next week. And we got to say this as well. We'll have all that election coverage next Thursday. So join us, won't you?
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.